Now, what happens often is that because we're really in a pit, we need to seek out people, right? Like a health coach or like my acupuncturist or a functional medicine doctor or, a nutritionist, whatever it is. And that's totally fine. But healing and awakening are solitary journeys that cannot be done alone. So both parts of those are challenging when you're in a pit. It's like, it's mine to do. My journey is just mine to do. And then at the same time, I cannot do it by myself.
From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
Hey, Hilda here. Pursuing health can take a lot of time and energy, and sometimes after knocking on a lot of doors, a person can still come up empty, their health concern completely puzzling from every angle. And when it stumps the doctors, the patient is often labeled difficult. What to do if that label is put on you? This is episode 315, and our guest today is Dr. Cynthia Lee, the author of Brave New Medicine. Cynthia understands both sides intimately. She is a functional medicine physician who is trying to heal her own challenging autoimmune condition when she herself was described as difficult. Today, she explains her own personal journey to health, how she had to shift her own paradigm from one of relying on external authorities and rationality to moving toward embracing intuition, instinct, and ancestral wisdom. She discusses the importance of not trying harder, but trying differently. And she goes over how it is that she came to see that life in medicine should not be approached with a paint-by-numbers mentality. Instead, she reminds us that to see what is true, we must pursue the deep interpersonal connection to ourselves. Before we get into it, do you have friends who are off-grid? We have a new offering on our website store. It is a USB flash drive of Wise Traditions podcasts from January to March of this year. 13 podcasts are available on a thumb drive, episodes 289 to 301 to be exact. It's only $20 and that includes shipping. Order yours at westonaprice.org/store. And by the way, we recognize that if you are listening to my voice right now, you might not need one of these. But you never know. Maybe you know someone who does. And I want to invite you to join our email list. We'll keep you abreast of events in your area and actions that you can take specific to your state for greater access to raw milk, for example, and for information on health and medical freedom issues. Just click on the link in the show notes or go to westonaprice.org on the homepage and you'll find the yellow button. Click on it and it's that easy. This is Holistic Hilda and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Cynthia.
Thank you so much for having me.
You mentioned in your book the most difficult patient. Can you describe her case, the most difficult patient you encountered?
Yeah, she was in her early 30s, a new mother, and was reportedly really healthy until that point. And a few months after she had her baby, she began having symptoms, palpitations, difficulty sleeping, weight loss, and initially ascribed it to postpartum stuff. And I had seen her as well and just thought, of course, it's postpartum stuff. You're tired, you're a new mom. But then she came back and she was actually diagnosed with autoimmune thyroid condition. And then most of the time in the postpartum period, these kinds of autoimmune conditions resolve. And a year later, she came back, her labs had totally normalized, but she still said she wasn't feeling well. And just her symptoms actually continued to escalate until she was quite unwell and was really housebound for a long time. But she kept coming back and her labs kept showing up normal.
So what do most doctors do when they encounter someone like this? What are the options? If it seems normal, what do you do?
On my training, I'm trained as an internist, which is a specialist in chronic conditions for adults. And what's really challenging is I've had a lot of, quote, difficult patients like that, where they come with a lot of symptoms that we can't explain through labs. And there are a lot of screening labs that I can order. So that's the initial step. And then, of course, a physical exam as well. Mm-hmm. And her physical exam after the thyroid stuff resolved was pretty unremarkable. And vital signs were normal. Usually in cases like that, we give various medications to help ease their symptoms. And
but you're going after the symptoms, not the root cause, because you can't determine what that is.
Exactly.
So what made this patient's case so very difficult to resolve?
Well, so what made it so difficult was not only that it was difficult to resolve, but that the symptoms continued to escalate. And there was just nothing really found on anything. And then what really made it difficult to resolve was that this patient was actually me. So what happens often is doctors will refer the patients on to somebody else. Or at some point things come to a head and the patient is frustrated with the doctor is frustrated with the patient. And okay, you know what, let's just either try a specialist, right? A psychiatrist, a neurologist, an immunologist, whoever it is that might be able to help guide this patient in a different way, or sending the patient to another primary care doctor. And in this case, I was really stuck with myself.
Oh my gosh. But I have a question. Did you label yourself a difficult patient? Was that a thing in medical circles?
Yeah. So I did I didn't actually overtly label myself, but I remember the moment when I was staring my thyroid doctor in the face saying, I still have thyroid symptoms. And in fact, they're worsening. And I could see it in his eyes that, oh my God, I've been that patient that I dread, that all doctors dread. And I'm causing him trouble. But because I had been trained that way, it was a real existential crisis for me because I didn't fit my own paradigm. I didn't fit my own truth of what reality was. And so it took me a long time to actually crack that because I kept questioning myself like, okay, it's just my symptoms. It's just in my head. I've got to will myself past this. And the objective data doesn't lie. That's what I was really struggling with.
I bet a lot of people can identify with this label that either they put on themselves or that the medical system puts on them because it's not always black and white, is it? In other words, the problem isn't black and white. You can't just say, as Sally Fallon-Morell likes to say, medicine isn't always paint by numbers. You have X thing, we give you this treatment and connect the dots. It's not always like that at all.
So the way that we're trained in conventional Western medicine is quite black and white, right? It's like for diabetes, right? If you have a certain number and you're on one side, okay, you're pre-diabetes, and you're on another side, you've got diabetes and therefore we start medication. So it does feel very black and white. And yet, of course, life and illness is not black and white. So the term, the difficult patient, is unfortunately used. Oh God, that this was a really difficult patient. And we all know as doctors, we know what that means. It can mean a lot of different things because there are some patients for different reasons, right? There might be challenging personalities. There might be a drug-seeking behavior. There may be, again, like these patients who keep coming back and demanding things and challenging our expertise. That's actually how it feels. It's like they're challenging us, and yet we're the ones who are trained.
It would be better if they could say it's a difficult case, right? Or a difficult situation.
Because that's what it is. Yes.
Right.
Absolutely. And of course, like now having been on the other side of the bedside, I understand like even things that we label, quote, drug-seeking behavior, and these patients are suffering. And because we are not addressing their root causes, they keep coming back and keep coming back. So our experience of that is, they're just seeking these kind of quick fixes and these things that are also, they're controlled substances, or maybe they're other just habit-forming drugs that we don't want, or they're using them in ways that aren't right, the way that they ought to be used. And so it does feel challenging, but it's not the person who's challenging. It's the fact that we don't have answers. And I would say also, as a doctor, the way that we're trained is that we need to find that solution. And there's some kind of magic solution. And we're still looking oftentimes for one cause, one effect. So what is that? Or what is the drug? What is the, procedure? What is that thing that will help alleviate the suffering? And so I'll speak for myself, but I also know a lot of friends who are doctors. There's a lot of pressure to figure that out. So I feel like both sides are very well-meaning and well-intentioned. And then we come to this head because we're all frustrated and we're all grieving, but there's no place for the grief to go. There's no way for us to express grief. And so anytime we cannot come up with that solution, or we cannot avert death in the most extreme cases, it's a medical failure. And that's completely not aligned with how life and life cycles are either. There's so many areas that are just culminating in this encounter of the difficult patient.
So here you were in a difficult situation, I'll say, as both a doctor and a patient.
Yes.
What did you do since there weren't any clear-cut answers?
It took me about 2 years of just remaining in misery. I was bedbound for about 6 months and then largely housebound for the greater part of a decade. But during I would say the first 2 years of that, I was just trying to make do. I was waiting for stuff to resolve because I didn't really have any answers. And at one point when my marriage was really on its just last threads holding us together, I had 2 young kids at home. I had not been able to work. I just felt like I was going to lose everything. And it was a wake-up call. Like, oh, wait a minute. Don't try harder. Don't wait longer. I need to try differently. So there was a moment, but it was really breaking down to the very last straw that I realized, okay, I have a choice. Either I try differently or this is more of the same.
So that must have been challenging too, because you had conventional training. So somehow you had to pivot in an entirely new direction.
Yeah. So it was not an enlightening moment. It was that I was desperate, really desperate.
So where did you go first? What did you do?
The first thing I did, because I was so debilitated, I had a chronic vertigo was one of my symptoms, as well as severe debilitating exhaustion. So it was very difficult even for me to read or to be on a screen. So it wasn't like I could suddenly do research on my own. I saw an acupuncturist. Actually, I tried a few before I found one that he just resonated with me. And his name was Bob Levine. Again, with a lot of resistance. And ironically, my family's heritage, I'm Chinese. And I was highly skeptical of anything that was, quote, alternative or holistic, even though it had been rooted in thousands of years or hundreds of years, at least this paradigm, right, of tradition. But I went, and it was this Jewish Buddhist man who ironically took me back into my own heritage and opened me up to that. So I responded, I'd say very strongly. It wasn't like I suddenly became better. I had a lot of withdrawal symptoms. He would put in like a couple of needles and I would have severe withdrawal symptoms. So, I was afraid of my symptoms getting worse. And he kind of just explained, hey, this is release. And it's like any other withdrawal. So you've got to release some of the trauma that's been stored in your body. Even before you got sick, you were storing these things and suppressing things in your body. So I began to learn actually about a very holistic sort of ecological paradigm way of looking at my body through him. He was, of course, traditional Chinese medicine trained, but I was using my scientific background to understand what was happening.
Coming up, Cynthia talks about how she began to explore the impact on her health of the air she was breathing, the food she was eating, and even the thoughts she was thinking.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
Join us on June 13th at Sally's Farm in Brandywine, Maryland, for a one-day event with Sally Fallon Morell, the president of the Weston A. Price Foundation, and local dentist Mark Dinola. $100 registration fee includes the all-day sessions and a nourishing farm-to-table lunch. It's an idyllic setting, and it promises to be a wonderful event. I personally can't wait. So go to westonaprice.org/events to sign up. And please go to Apple Podcasts and rate and review this podcast. Some haters have started popping up on there, and I can only hope that there are more people who love the show than we are aware of. So please show up and let folks know that this podcast is worth a listen. Go to Apple Podcasts and click on Rate and Review. Thank you in advance. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. So acupuncture is one thing that you tried, but I understand you started walking bravely in a lot of new directions. Talk to us about some of the other protocols or healing modalities that you started to apply to your life and to your family's life as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It was very stepwise. So once what Bob helped me get to a place where he helped me get to was a place where I could sleep a little bit better. And so it wasn't great. And even today, like if I can tell when my body's out of balance, because the first thing that goes is my sleep, even when I was younger. Sleep was a little bit back on track. And then my equilibrium was a little bit better. So I was able to start reading. I was really focused on, just researching. What are ways? I dove into the ecological paradigm of health, environmental health stuff, really understanding how chemicals, the air we breathe, the food we eat, all these things actually affect the way our genes express, the way that our neurons are wired and things like that. But really key to that is actually our thoughts and our emotions and how often the thoughts, right? There's an estimated 15 to 80,000 thoughts per day.
Wait, say that number again.
Incredible. Well, it's debatable because it's been hard to actually define, like, how do you measure a thought, right? With our scans, with whatever technologies we have, but somewhere between 15,000 to 80,000 thoughts a day.
And so all of those thoughts are communicating to our whole body, to all the cells, right? Like whether we should express an emotion or hold it in, how we're perceiving a difficult conflict or traumatic situation. And so that's going to affect every bit of our body.
Yes. And then what I started calculating or just imagining was, okay, if our conscious mind is just a small percentage, right? Somewhere between 5 to 10% of the total mind. So the vast majority is subconscious. What is happening, right, with these circuits in our bodies? Because if we've got 15 to 80,000 conscious thoughts a day, right, then the subconscious stuff we're just feeding all the time. At the time, I did not know what to even do with that because my mind was all over the place. I could not control. I had no agency over my physiology. That's how it felt.
Mm-hmm.
But just being aware of that was very humbling. It was like, okay, what patterns have been established for a very long time that sort of just got triggered, right, by these more recent insults, right? Whether it was the pregnancy hormones, and then there were some infections I had, and then, was it the mercury in my fillings? Again, so slowly over time, what was happening was I was going from conventionally trained doctor to integrative and something called functional medicine, right? Functional medicine really taking the lifestyle medicine of integrative medicine, but then also really looking at root causes. You had mentioned root causes. So the symptoms that we have, the conditions, the diagnoses that we have are really leaves on the tree. And then there are all these factors that are being taken up at the roots. And so they manifest in different people, depending on their genetic predisposition, depending maybe on their personality or their constitution, they manifest in different ways. So what's beautiful, so things get very complex, right? Oh my God, is it this? Is it that? Do I eat gluten? Do I autoimmune paleo? It can get really confusing. What's beautiful about this paradigm is that if we address the root causes, then all these seemingly disparate conditions on the roots can heal at the same time. And so you asked about my family as well. Like one of the things that my family's journey took me to actually was Weston A. Price's work. And my older daughter, who was 5, I had taken her to the dentist. We weren't like a no sugar, all whole foods kind of family, but we were, I would say, fairly, quote, healthy. And she had really good, teeth hygiene. We made sure that she brushed her teeth every night before bed and ideally in the morning. And so when we took her to the dentist for her first visit, we were shocked to find that she had several cavities. And I began to actually research and found what Dr. Price's work just about, oh my God, there's ancestral diets and look at what happened with these people, right? They had And it wasn't just hygiene and cavities. It was like orthodontia. It was facial structure. And so in conventional training, we are taught, not nearly enough, but we are taught very briefly that the structure of the body, the form actually informs the function. So what was really happening with my body was a complete dysfunction. And so I started really thinking about form and structure, and I was looking at my daughter. And then from Dr. Price's work, we did really completely revamp our, not only what we ate, but how we cooked, how we prepared the foods. And it, again, this was another way in which it reconnected me with my ancestors as well. And then, but then from that also, I started researching, and then I found this connection with gluten. And sure enough, I had an autoimmune response to gluten. So did my daughter. So that was a really big opening in so many different ways. It connected me to the land in a way that environmental health science didn't. I was thinking with environmental health, it connected me, but in a theoretical and mechanical way. Oh, okay, this is what we need to do, because kind of formulaic. Mm-hmm. And then Dr. Price's stuff just took me right back to, oh my God, I need to get my hands in the soil. We started a garden in our backyard. We were living in this tiny backyard in San Francisco, but hey, we had a little garden bed. So it was restorative in the root cause sense in a way that I hadn't fully appreciated.
Wow. What you're saying really resonates, Cynthia, because we at the Weston Price Foundation are about food, farming, and the healing arts. We understand that to be well, it takes more than the food we eat. We're more than that. Dr. Price also observed how much time the indigenous cultures were outside and how they were in community and all these factors. So it really makes me happy to hear you articulate this in such a beautiful way, because I think people need to appreciate that there may be a way to take their difficult situation and approach the healing journey a little differently.
Yeah, because now that I've been working with patients for several years in this paradigm, the perfect diet doesn't actually exist. We wish it did because it'd make things simpler, but they're eating really, I'll just say, good, wholesome, nutrient dense diets. And okay, what's missing? And it's easy to prescribe a supplement, right, to heal the gut more. But I feel like they're very temporizing measures unless these deeper hows can be addressed, right? How are you living your life? How are you letting go of things that you need to let go of? How are you really connecting with your body when you're eating? How are you connecting to the food? We tend to get very prescriptive about things rather than the mind body piece is the part that is, I would say, the hardest because we have to go within ourselves. And most of the time, that's the scariest part.
You didn't have to go there yourself, did you?
Oh my God, like, no way. And for me, I was thinking of it as very physical, like, oh my God, my body's so uncomfortable. That's the last place I want to go. But so much of it was intertwined with the emotions and the traumas. And I don't even like to label them traumas anymore because they're challenges. And if we ignore them, they come back and they need to be released in some way.
Yes, it's like whack-a-mole at the carnival or at the funland at the beach. You knock it down in one spot, it's just going to pop up somewhere else.
Exactly. So I did that for a long time, and I did that for most of my life, but I didn't realize it because as a kid, you develop certain coping skills to survive, but many of them, at least for myself, they were maladaptive. And at some point in my early adulthood, my system cracked, couldn't hold everything in anymore.
So, Cynthia, do you take what you've learned? Now you said you are a functional medicine practitioner. So you do take it to your patients and try to address their healing in a different way, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. I started my private practice it's been about 8 years now, and it evolved as I evolved. So there was another thread that I write about in my book, but I sort of explore it. It's just the beginning of the exploration. And it was the role of intuition. And I was going to call it intuitive medicine, but that's not what it was in the beginning. It was really intuition. And again, that's tapping into yourself. And the other piece about intuition is embracing mystery, which is completely opposite of what the analytical mind wants to know definitively. So it's a strange duality that somehow it comes together though, right? It's like you have this one part of living your life and also thinking. You can say it's based in the right brain, but a lot of the new data is looking at the signals are actually coming from the heart and from the gut. So sending things up to the brain to be able to interpret it. And so the simplified way is just, okay, you've got a right brain, you've got a left brain, and the left brain's analytical, the right brain's intuitive and spatial, and you bring them together. So I see it as we have two eyes to see deeper and broader. And so what happens when we employ both sides of our minds to really looking at a patient, whether it's myself or somebody else, and can I see what is more true? The left brain really wants to be right. And the right brain is really about, and the heart is about, not about being right. It's not an ego thing. It's, can I see what is true in front of me? So I use those together now in my practice. And again, I practiced on myself a lot with my health. What happened when I broke out into integrated functional medicine suddenly was I went from no tools to infinite numbers of tools. Talk about diets, right? How many different diets? And then not only that, your body changes, right? And you need different things at different times. And so how do you know what to do? And a lot of it was because of that question of not knowing and not having the analytical data to tell you, was to go into intuition. And again, that one was really taking me out into a different experience of life. And I met that with a lot of resistance, a lot of skepticism and fear. But now it just helps me. What I realized in my training was we're really good at ruling things out. We do a lot of tests to rule out the most ominous diagnoses. Oh, thank God. Okay, you don't have cancer. You don't have some full-on, right, really complicated autoimmune condition. But then what do we do with it? So what the intuitive piece really has helped me do and taught me is how do we rule things in much more quickly? So it feels very efficient. So my doctor's mind is very much about what is effective, what is efficient. And so that's been a piece of my healing journey that has been completely unexpected.
Oh, it reminds me of when I was studying with the Institute for Integrative Nutrition to become a health coach. They said, don't tell your clients like what to do because they already know. And so there's a sense in which we all need to develop that intuitive, deep listening to our bodies and our spirits and our minds so we can go there because the answer isn't necessarily outside of us, right?
Yes, yes. And the thing about healing, and so one of the things that I've really learned, this is actually through my Qigong practice. Qigong is an embodied consciousness practice that is, rooted in ancient Chinese wisdom. And one of the things that I learned through that is how healing and awakening, right? Awakening our consciousness, awakening to just greater truths of how life is and what we're here for. They just happen hand in hand, right? They're like 2 feet marching along. When we heal, we awaken to ourselves and to the world outside of ourselves. When we are awakening, we heal. They just happen, even as side effects, even if we're not seeking one or the other. And yeah, it's been really powerful to do that. Now, what happens often is that because we're really in a pit, we need to seek out people, right? Like a health coach or like my acupuncturist or a functional medicine doctor or a nutritionist, whatever it is. And that's totally fine. But healing and awakening are solitary journeys that cannot be done alone. So both parts of those are challenging when you're in a pit. It's like, it's mine to do. My journey is just mine to do. And then at the same time, I cannot do it by myself.
Paradox.
So we also heal in community, right? And sometimes, you know what, I do have a lot of patients who are very isolated. And right now during COVID, it's really challenging. I myself at my pit felt very isolated as well. So even in those moments, though, if we can connect to nature, we can connect even to people that we're not directly in community with. We can connect to our ancestors who have passed before us. So even defining what connection is has changed in my own journey. So what I really work with my patients with is, you were talking about empowerment, and empowerment is really the self-empowerment is one of the fundamental ingredients for healing. And okay, I'm happy to shepherd you on this, but don't give me all of your power. Like it's actually yours to reclaim.
Wow. I hope these words sink into each individual's heart who's listening right now. It is a challenge and it's scary and it's the unknown, but we don't have to walk it alone, especially in light of what you just said. We have connection. So this has been a profound conversation, Cynthia. I have one more question to pose to you, and this might be complicated because you have a very holistic approach. If the listener could do one thing to improve their health, what would you recommend that they do?
The one thing I would recommend, it changes again based on just my personal journey, but the one thing I'll say I wish I had done earlier and deeper was my practice in wisdom healing Qigong, because we cannot heal something we're not connected to. And I did not realize how disconnected my mind was from my body. So once we have that fundamental piece, everything, like the food that we eat, becomes transformed. And I want to say it's hard for me to pinpoint one thing because that together with the food piece sort of went hand in hand. In my book, I talk about it very separately. In integrative medicine, we talk about it very separately, but they really, in lived experience, they went hand in hand. So in both situations, I feel like I am eating, I'm harnessing energy from the earth, from the sun, from all the cycles. So I'm playing into nature's cycles when I eat. And then when I do Qigong, I actually say I'm eating sort of the source energy. So they're very wound and bound together. So I'm going to actually sneak in both of those. So the diet piece. I was excited to be invited on this podcast. And I've been doing a lot fewer podcasts lately, just being more selective with my time and energy. But yeah, Dr. Price's work and also the work of the foundation was really essential to my healing as well.
Thank you for including us, Cynthia, in your life. And we're feeling the positive energy from this conversation and our connection today. And we look forward to talking to you again sometime.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Our guest today was Dr. Cynthia Lee. Learn more about Cynthia and her work at cynthialeemd.com. And that's Lee, L-I, by the way. And I'm Hilda Labrada Gore, the host and producer of this show for the Weston A. Price Foundation. My website is holistichilda.com. And for the transcript for this podcast, visit our website, westonaprice.org, and click on the podcast page. And now for a recent letter to the editor from the Wise Traditions Journal. I recently had lunch with an electrical lineman from Michigan who told me that his electrical workers union refused a job to install 5G in the area. You see, there are electrical workers from around the world who have signed an appeal against 5G. Go to 5gspaceappeal.org/engineers. It is interesting also to note that much of the 5G controversy that I found on the web predates this pandemic, as though the defenders of 5G have gone silent since COVID-19. This is a letter from Jessica from Massachusetts. Thank you for sending that letter, Jessica. And if anyone else would care to, you can write a letter to the editor as well, and we may just publish it in an upcoming journal. Thank you so much for listening, my friend. Stay well. Hasta pronto.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.